Hello and welcome to this on-location broadcast, Essential 2020 Meetings Trends. We're here in beautiful San Francisco at PCMA convening Leaders 2020 for this great broadcast on what to look out for in the coming year. And thanks to Tourism Montreal for sponsoring this and bringing it to you today. And please stay tuned after the conclusion for a brief message from them. Joining us is Will Curran, Chief Event Einstein of Endless Events, Joshua Grimes with Grimes Law Offices, and Corbin Ball with Corbin Ball and Company. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Happy to be here.
So let's kick it over to Josh first. What should meeting planners and those in the meetings industry be looking out for this year?
Well, the hottest topics I'm dealing with, the first one is cannabis usage. And I really discuss it as part of an overall trend because cannabis, as of January 1 of this year, is legal now in 11 states, Washington, D.C., all of Canada, and in some other jurisdictions, and it's spreading across the country. The other reason it's important is because the use of drugs that were or could be currently legal or formerly were legal is spreading. For instance, Colorado and Denver, they have just decriminalized magic mushrooms, and I see this as part of a trend. And as these things become legal around the country, there's increased usage at meetings. Yeah. And when I say increased usage, it's not just bringing the cannabis into a meeting, but it's also...
Although I think that has happened before.
It happens, yes. Yeah. And in fact, there are some venues in towns that actually have cannabis concierges who will actually bring varieties of weed to your meeting for your attendees to sample, if that's what you want to do. But I'm guessing that a majority of the people listening to this, that's not what they do, or maybe it's a great idea. But what we're talking about is the fact that just like alcohol usage, the use of cannabis can have an implication for a meeting, even if you're not serving it. If you're serving it, certainly, but even if you're not, if someone gets hurt, as with alcohol, an event sponsor could be sued, a venue could be sued, and as well as the person who's actually using the cannabis, and the planner. So there's all sorts of liability that goes around, and this is what we're talking about. What's critical is that if you know or that cannabis is being used, and not just if you're providing it, if you know it's happening. So you know from past experience that your guests at your meeting are of the type who are going to stand outside the entrance to the hotel during one of your evening events and smoke weed, and they could get high. You arguably have a responsibility to control that because, again, if something goes wrong, you'll certainly be part of a lawsuit. So just very quickly, it's something to look into. It's something to know the parameters. And I should say, by the way, not that we're into visuals here, but it's important enough that when I went on the San Francisco CVB's website, they have a whole sheet about what you should know about legal marijuana in California that has a lot of guidelines and warnings in it. And it's actually very, very helpful. So these are things that you need to plan for. Plan to make sure that if people are going to get high, they're going to do it safely. They're not going to go drive a car or swim in the ocean right afterwards or go off the high trapeze and that sort of thing. And the last thing I'll say is that you need to have insurance that covers it. Because if something happens, you want your insurance to cover it.
What would that insurance look like?
I was going to say, what would that be called?
Right now, I think it's kind of progressive to, not the brand name, but it's progressive to expect your insurance company to cover it. Yeah. But as with anything else, I think that you should discuss, because you don't want your organization, or if you're an independent planner, you don't want to be left exposed to some lawsuit. Just like alcohol liability, I think this is the direction that we're going into, and these are questions that people should ask of their insurance company.
And I know with alcohol liability too, there's strategies to undertake, having professional bartenders,
Yes.
strategies to maybe not have an open bar or
Yes.
limit the consumption. But there's nothing like that for marijuana usage, right?
Well, there are laws in every state. In fact, what San Francisco tells us that in San Francisco you have to be 21 or older. Here's how much you can possess legally. It's illegal to sell or give it to minors. Who you have to buy it from, they'll tell you, and not names, but the kind of people you have. They're licensed people to buy it from. So there is that part.
Yeah.
And there are not tests now like with alcohol, like breathalyzers to say. In fact, they're working on tests to control, how much is too much. It's really more of a measure, I think, of making sure that people aren't in a position to harm themselves and others if they're going to do it. Or you could add in your meeting's code of conduct, we prohibit this. And in fact, that's good, because even if someone does it, if you can show that your organization prohibits it, that helps you defend against a lawsuit if it happens.
And a funny thing, I took a cruise on the bay yesterday with hornblower cruises, and everybody kind of got a chuckle, but they were saying, if you want to smoke cigarettes, you can go up on the third deck.
Yes.
But they said, as soon as we pull out of port, we're in federal water, so don't think about smoking cannabis up there.
Because it's illegal federally.
Yeah, and everybody got a chuckle out of it, but that's just the fact, right?
And in fact, one of the things that I get asked a lot about, I get asked a lot about it, is, well, what happens if I go to California or Nevada or Illinois where cannabis is legal? I go there and I partake, and then I go home and my employer drug tests me. That is not just because it was legal where you're doing it. If your employer has a anti-drug policy and that's considered an illegal drug by your employer, you're not necessarily protected.
Yeah.
So it's something that people need to think about. And federal law does prohibit cannabis usage, although this is one of those things the federal, state governments are wrestling with right now.
Interesting.
And
how about another topic you mentioned is personal data privacy issues?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. This is one of those things that everyone hears about GDPR. I suspect that half the people watching this, their eyes just glossed over when I even mentioned that acronym. And it happens. GDPR is confusing, but data privacy isn't just GDPR. As of January 1st of this year, California just put into effect their new consumer privacy law. Mm-hmm. Canada has data protection laws, in addition to the Europeans with GDPR, and other states are considering it. So this is a trend, and data privacy is becoming a best practice in this industry because people expect their data to be protected. When I say data, personal information, name, address, email address, even food preferences, credit cards, their image in many cases. It's all considered personal data that needs to be protected. And the bottom line with this is that organizations that are taking in data need to think, without going into the specifics of each law, California and GDPR, need to think about, you need to tell people that you're collecting their data, get them to agree that you're collecting it, tell them how you're going to use it, give them an opportunity to say if they don't want you to use it in particular ways. Like maybe you say, we're going to take the attendee list and we're going to give it to all of our exhibitors and sponsors at this meeting. Well, give your attendees an option to opt out of that because they may want it spread. You need to store the personal data in a secure manner to help prevent a data breach. If a consumer wants you to destroy their data, not retain it, you need to respect that. There should be notification if there's a data breach. It's notification to consumers. And so these are sort of the parameters. Again, California's law, and I'll give Corbin a chance in a moment. California, it deals with more large companies that have $25 million or more in gross sales from buying and selling personal information. That's who it more applies to. But still, as I say, this is a trend, and I think that consumers, that attendees at your meetings expect you to have these in place and to give them a choice rather than the old default of, well, you signed up for our meeting, so we gave your name and your email address to all of our sponsors, and whether you like it or not, they're calling you, and you can opt out to them, but we're just going to give it out. So, please.
Oh, I think I'm all in favor of GDPR and the other privacy initiatives, especially what's happening with technology is that it's becoming extremely ubiquitous, and there are so many ways that data can be captured about an individual. On the plus side, from an event manager standpoint and from an exhibitor standpoint, that is a very granular detail that can really allow people to personalize. And events are really about meeting people. It's not as much about privacy, but I think giving everyone the option to be able to opt out, to become invisible, to be forgotten in these records, and just be very clear data policies is the direction that things are going. That we need to do that. We need to adopt that as an industry. And I'm happy to see California's laws, Canada's laws, and Europe in pushing that forward, because never before has data collection been so easy and so ubiquitous.
Right. It almost needs to be like opt-in now, though, moving forward, rather than just opt-out. Because I think, I think we're obviously, like you said, this is a trend that's going to, people think to themselves, oh, I'm not in California, I don't do business in California, but it's going to come to every state, like you said.
Yes.
But I think it needs to go to almost opt-in too, where it's like, you know what you're going and you're agreeing to it beforehand rather than just, oh, hey, like I get out. Because sometimes once you opted, you've already got in, you're already getting hundreds of emails. Okay, now I have to opt out. It's damage is already done, right?
Right. And just to be clear, when we're talking about opt-in is what GDPR says. And some people may be saying, well, I don't do business in Europe. We do our meetings in New York or Vegas, but that's not what GDPR is about. GDPR is a European law that applies to Europeans and applies to data that moves through Europe, that may be stored or passes through Europe. And many meetings, pharmaceutical meetings, financial meetings, have Europeans who attend.
Sure.
So you could say that, well, I'm not going to worry about GDPR because only 10 of my attendees attend. But you're now violating GDPR as far as those 10 attendees, and we're at the point where between GDPR, California, and other states that come along, frankly, it's easier to just comply, or at least to go a long way towards complying. And again, as I say, I think people expect it. Let's face it, everyone has data breaches. It's nobody's, well, it's their fault, I guess, but every hotel company has had a data breach. Many suppliers have had data breaches. The Wawa consumer store, fast food store where I live, just had a big data breach. It happens. So there's no harm to GDPR in that it helps people know that they can limit their data if that's what they want to do, thinking because a data breach might happen. And it also makes those companies better because they have to store data according to certain standards, not just what they want to do.
And how can meeting planners facilitate this? I mean, it really sounds like a big challenge.
From the technology standpoint, just in the procurements that they make, make sure. I think the one thing is, first question asked, is it GDPR compliant? And even though you may have, like you say, one or two people that most of your members or attendees are not from Europe, they are. You still have to comply. There's huge fines if you don't. But I think that the structure that it sets up is a really important one, and that is if it's GDPR compliant, there's very few adoptions, for example, to become California compliant as well. I think you just have to have an opt-out on your website is kind of the one step, from the way I understand it. And so it's that would be the first step, is just make sure that if you are managing data, attendee data, that it is GDPR compliant. The companies do that.
And if you are GDPR compliant, do you think that's sort of the strictest set of rules? And I know it depends, right?
Well, it depends. I think that some companies in the financial services industry and some others may have stricter rules.
Yeah.
But again, for most of the people who might be watching this today, I think it's certainly a great start.
Yeah.
And I often hear from people, well, my company doesn't really, it's 2 years, a year and a half since GDPR went in, but we really don't know what to do. We got some language we copied off the internet. That's a start.
And the pop-up where you have to like approve.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to minimize that. That's a start.
Yeah.
And anything is better than just using people's data, without their consent and without taking reasonable protections of people's data. Because again, I think that in the long run, if someone has the choice of, I think people will be dissatisfied if you're just giving out their data, because people are much more conscious of that now than they used to be.
I was going to add too, I think a lot of times people get caught up in like the tech stuff of like, oh, I have to have the pop-up for the cookies, and oh, does every form have that box? But like a lot of times too, it's a mindset too, that far too often we're just, like you said, giving out lists.
Right. Yeah.
And oh, hey, here, take this list and things like that. And the fact that that's okay, you should, as an organizer, be able to say, no, that's not okay. We're not going to have that mentality. Let's make it all 100% opt-in.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I just wanted to add, because you said, what can people do a few minutes ago? It's important to look at your meeting contracts and see. The tendency is to say, well, I'm dealing with big hotel company. They've got this link to a privacy policy, and that's got to be okay. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not. I'm not knocking their privacy policies, but I don't know that's sufficient for every customer that's having a meeting at a venue or a hotel. Your organization may decide that you've promised your attendees you're not going to give out their information to exhibitors, other hotel brands, and that sort of thing. Do you know that you can't, that the hotel's privacy policy prohibits them from giving the information and sharing it? You have to read it, and more importantly, insist upon, if you've got, your organization has its own privacy policy about data protection, insist on negotiating that into the contract. So, please.
To broaden things just a little bit from a data breach and data protection standpoint, additional thing I would add on is if you're taking any type of credit card information, be sure that the products that you're using are PCI compliant, payment card industry compliant as well.
Yes.
Interesting. And then, Josh, you had a final item you wanted to discuss about an additional fees imposed by hotels, venues, and suppliers, including destination fees. What are those?
Let's have
Planner's
some fun.
favorite stuff, more fees.
More fees, right?
Well, this is look.
Resort fees?
Yes, venues do what everybody else does in other industries. They look for new sources of revenue or different ways to carve up revenue. And what I've been doing this for 20 some odd years. And we had resort fees 15, 20 years ago, and then we got the handle on those, we thought. And now we see new revenue sources. So one thing we talk about, destination fees. Resort fees used to be at resorts.
Yeah.
You're getting beach towels, you're getting use of the cabanas. Now even urban hotels are adding destination fees. Or calling them something similar, which frankly sound like a tax by the government, but what they are is $30 extra or whatever, how much they're charging for use of the gym, for bathrobes in the room. Basically, it's a reason, with all due respect to our hotel partners, it's a reason to charge more money. And instead of raising your base fee that's quoted, it's now an add-on.
So
and
it
frankly,
sounds like their intentions aren't pure.
Well, it's business. And in fact, these fees have been the subject of some attorney general actions about disclosure, and we'll see how that turns out. But the key is for planners to look out for those fees. Make sure they work, make sure you want to pay them. Other fees that we're seeing these days. I'm seeing service charges. There's always been service charges, but two things about them. One is contracts that say the service charge today is 25%. You will pay the charge at the time of your meeting, which basically is what I flippantly call an open wallet kind of clause that says it could be whatever. The other thing that is fairly new is service charges charged on meeting space rental.
Yeah.
We've always seen it on F&B in meeting spaces. Now I see it on a meeting space rental.
It's on AV now too.
Right. Another variant of that is whether maybe your group gets discounted meeting space or discounted food and beverage. But the service charge in the contract says it's calculated on the undiscounted meeting rental or undiscounted F&B. We're seeing attrition, which is, everybody knows if you don't use up your room block, we see that traditionally has been counted cumulatively over the entire room block. Now we're seeing attrition by day. So if you miss your room block on one day, you'll pay attrition, although typically the way the contracts are drafted, if you're over your block on another day, you get no credit. So it's an opportunity for more charges in that. We're seeing charges for power to plug in the plugs in a meeting space, whereas maybe that would be included. One thing I saw very recently is there's typically sometimes been a little bit of a markup for a special meal at a property. So a kosher meal, a gluten-free meal. I saw a property that adds a flat $75 charge each meal for any special meal.
For a single plate?
Yes, for a single plate. And again, I don't know how widespread that is, but lawyers tend to not see the good stuff. We tend to see the other stuff that people say, gee, have you ever seen this? So I saw that recently. So here's sort of not to close this discussion is, but here's sort of the thing. Critically important these days to understand everything in your contract. It was always important. Understand what all the charges are, how they're being calculated. If you don't understand or you don't think you've got a handle, if you want to agree to pay all these charges, that's okay. But understand how they're being calculated. Really look at the attrition clause. Look at the other clauses, the fees. And the other thing is that I've always advocated to put a clause in the contract that says, we've now agreed to in this contract, here are the charges we've agreed to. Any additional costs must be approved separately by the group.
Right.
So that way you're not going to have a situation where you're told we now have a markup on our bringing in a third-party AV vendor or something that wasn't in the contract, but now you have to pay it. It helps avoid that, but it's really important, A, to button things down in your contracts, and B, to talk to others in the industry to see what trends they're seeing, because these fees tend to spread.
Absolutely.
And Will, what are you hearing out there?
Gosh.
You have a number of broadcasts, like event icons, where it's you're talking to people in the industry all the time. What's on top of their heads?
I can transition out of the fees pretty well, but I think that we are seeing all these additional fees, and I think planners are getting uneasy about the traditional hotel and conference centers. Right?
Yeah.
They're afraid of having these fees. They see just costs continuing to rise. So, we kind of are seeing this rise of the alternative venue. People want to be, for example, last night we were in Pier 48, and it's definitely one of those alternative venues. Really low cost of rental, blank slate space, but you have to do all the work for the generators and power. Some people are comfortable with that, but what's interesting is that I believe that the alternative venues aren't ready, though, for the level of sophistication that planners are looking for. There's a reason why we like hotels, right? Like, we know what we're getting, we know it's gonna be clean, we're gonna get the service. If we need something last minute, we can make it happen. Sometimes these alternative venues, you show up and say, like, oh my gosh, like, turns out we sold twice as many tickets, we need valet now, can you just do the valet for me? And they go, no, like, you gotta go hire another company to do that and this and that. So I definitely think that there's gonna be this rise of the alternative venues, and they need to step up their games. I think planners are willing to pay a little bit more for alternative venues because they know they're gonna pay way less than a hotel or conference center, but they have to be ready with super fast, secure Wi-Fi. Know how to handle large audiences. All these sort of things that
security.
Oh my gosh, and security for sure. And that's also just, another. You're just giving me the perfect transitions between like all my favorite trends. But we talked about data security, but also like physical security as well. I think that we, in a lot of ways, safety is probably the number one thing that we have to worry about in events, because we've gotten far too long not doing the right things, and like we just continue, bad things happen, and then that's when everyone goes, oh gosh, yeah, we got to focus on security and safety and this and that, when it's like, no, we just need to be doing this every single day for all the time. We need to be thinking about it, and we have to be willing to also invest money into it too, rather than it being a cost add-on at the last minute. So oh my gosh, do you want me to keep going down through all these trends?
Yeah,
please. Yeah.
You really have a pulse, because you're essentially doing these sorts of roundtables all the time, right?
Yeah. And let me just say, Will's right on target here with security. Security is an investment, and it's important for two reasons. One, because unfortunately, you must have security. And in fact, you must have it in ways that maybe a few years ago you didn't. It's not just for events in dangerous places, but we're now seeing people bring in speakers that might be a little controversial. And whereas a few years ago they were invited in and people were respectful, people unfortunately aren't always respectful to every speaker anymore. So it requires thought about whether you need extra security. The other thing is that aside from whether security is essential, what I'm finding is that in many cases attendees won't go to a meeting if they don't feel safe. So there needs to be a perception of security also. We're in an age where a few years ago there was an shooting at an outdoor concert in Las Vegas, and things happen in restaurants and at video gaming things that used to be safe environments. Right. It causes people to maybe rethink if they're insecure about whether they want to go. So people have to know that the group that's sponsoring the meeting is taking measures to show that they're being protected, or else they may choose not to come.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, at that point, it's too late, too. I mean, like, it's way too late. It's going to be, you have to be thinking about it's proactive. And it's funny, too, because I think you talk about controversial speakers. They seem like a big kind of red flag things, but sometimes it's super duper small. So, for example, Phoenix Comic-Con had an active shooter at their event. Luckily, the guy didn't actually end up pulling a trigger, but essentially he had a beef with one of the Power Rangers. Wow. And the way I know it sounds crazy, but, feel free, we did an episode
about the world we live in.
Yeah, exactly, the world we live in. But it's just one guy had a beef, and it's a comic book convention. Everybody's dressed up, having fun. But he walks in through security looking like the Punisher. Turns out he has a real gun rather than a fake gun. He has all these real knives. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm a business meeting. Why would anyone blah target this? It's like, how do you know that someone's not targeting the event next door to you? And how do they know that your event's not part of that? I mean, people don't think about this sort of stuff. And I think that we think that it's okay just to, maybe have someone stationed at the front or whatnot, but we have to go above and beyond this way further than I think that we already have as well. And sometimes it's going to be inconvenient, sometimes it's going to cost more money, but we got to do it to protect our attendees, because we definitely don't want something tragic to happen as well.
And what other things are you seeing out there?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that we talk a lot about like the excitement around technology and everything like that, but we're also in this day and age where we want to have, for example, there's this trend of more white space at events, that we need to have more space for people to breathe and think and digest everything as well. But one of the things I think that everyone's trying to do right now is, as my phone's sitting on the table, is try to limit people's usage of phones and technology. So we're seeing this kind of a rise of I would call it like the passive technology, and I think, like, for example, and I know Corbin's going to talk a lot about this, but facial recognition, for example, like, instead of having to go up and tap on an iPad and use a screen and all these things like that, you just walk up and boom, the technology takes care of itself in there. So I figure that'd be a good transition for Corbin to talk about all the crazy cool tech stuff going on in the world right now.
There's a lot of it happening. So that's one area we were talking about is the privacy protection, and that kind of runs immediately at odds with some of the technology things that are happening, tracking, especially facial recognition. And it's on one hand, it can really expedite the registration process, for example. On the other hand, it can be perceived as being quite invasive. Some people are really afraid of this. And so you need to make, there again, you need to give people an option to opt out of these technologies and not to be remembered with that. One of the big trends I want to bring up, I think it's not just for 2020, it's for this decade, it's going to change everything, is artificial intelligence. It is the decade 2000 was the decade of the widespread adoption of the web. Decade 2000. I believe that this coming decade is going to be the decade of artificial intelligence, and it's going to, it's hard to imagine how pervasive this is going to be. I believe this is one of those major overarching technology that will change society. And you're starting to see this work its way into to events, and one is facial recognition. That is one that you can. The IAEE conference this last December was they're using facial recognition to expedite the registration process. Less than 7 seconds per person. You walk up and it recognizes you and it spits out the badge. And so it really does add on the convenience, but it does make it scary for some people as well. But there's some other aspects. Worldly is one. It's a voice recognition system that can translate a simultaneous translation instantly into 15 different languages.
Right.
And people use their mobile devices to access that, or even if you're hearing impaired, to be able to see it in your own language there, to do that at a fraction of the cost it would take to set up translation booths and bring in interpreters. And it's not perfect. You probably wouldn't want to use this for the United Nations, but it does have a fairly quite accurate recognition rate, and I think it's going to open up to a broad range for webinars, for smaller meetings. So there's great aspects to benefit events. One aspect in terms of artificial intelligence, I think, is face recognition or face identification, sentiment analysis on an anonymous basis. And so this, for example, Zenus is one that is, they have a camera that can point out to an audience. And 1,000 people may be in fairly low light level, and they can do an accurate audience count, estimates of gender, age, and interest. And so are they paying attention? Are they not? Second by second through, and so from feedback for speakers or just to an event planner about how effective that speaker is, extremely helpful tools, and it's
in
anonymous.
real time,
In real time, and it's anonymous. And another one in the exhibit booth is TrackMini, and so they can you set up it's an iPhone app essentially. Set up an app in different parts of your exhibit. You can see dwell time, age, the number of people, what they're looking at, and if they are interested, even down to where they're looking at onto a chart or so forth. So there's a lot of capabilities that are coming along that line, and then those are just a few, but just on a more pervasive level for Salesforce automation and just customizing and personalizing your communications with attendees and prospective attendees. This is going to be throughout the business, the economy, and it's going to change everything, I think.
If I may, of course, that Corbin points out the positive ends for meetings and all that, and the lawyer has to talk about the other end. I think the challenge here, though, is that people need to understand that these are all great developments, but there's risks, and I don't think most people think this out. I mean, we hear all the time about, millennials are more likely to give their personal data out or to use an app that can track them, or our insurance company, our auto insurance has an app that if we use it while we're driving, we'll save a few bucks. There's another end of this that we've seen with some of this. So it's terrific, and it is that you can use AI to scan an audience, seeing who's paying attention, and we're told it's anonymous. And it may be until a data breach happens. And then, or we get into a situation that we have seen, and we saw them starting with the intelligent name tags that automatically say who's coming in and out of a meeting room.
Right.
Well, people use that information in divorce proceedings.
Yeah.
We want to know if the husband went to the PCMA conference, and we suspect his girlfriend was there, we can now look and see who he was sitting with in the meeting room.
Wow.
Where we can see when his name tag registered he was going into room 570, did his alleged girlfriend go into the room at the same time with him? And this is not far-fetched. People have used the data this way. So I think that the challenge is to understand, and facial recognition, again, great, but if the data falls into the wrong hands because someone wasn't using proper safeguards, now who knows who has information with their data. So it's, again, positive, and I mean that, positive developments, but there's another side that you can't forget about here, that even more reason for attendees to make knowing decisions about whether they want to participate.
It's like a freight train that's running down the track, and everything else is trying to catch up to it with the technology.
And I think that highlights the need to give people the option to opt out.
Yes.
But in general, in events, people, when you go to events, we are wearing our name tags around our neck. It's about meeting people. It's about connecting people. And in general, to provide these capabilities and to help people connect with buyers and sellers. This is part of why two reasons why people go to events: education and networking. And if you can improve that networking process, one good contact at an event can oftentimes pay for the whole trip.
Right.
And so if you can help with this, I think technology can be a real benefit in that area. With the cautions that Josh brings out.
And then VR and AR, what is the state of that, the adoption?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how things play out. Virtual reality it's immersive. It takes you off to someplace else, and there are applications for site inspection, for room diagramming, to sit down and see exactly what the room is going to look like before you set it. For building an exhibit booth, it'd be before you put the hammer to the nail, you put in exactly know how it's going to be. So there are benefits there. At a meeting, though. In the future, there's going to be interactive games, and multiple people can be multiple users, starting to do that. But in terms of a direct application in meetings, aside for product demos, I don't see much of that happening here. But augmented reality, on the other hand, is I think it is a view of the real world supplemented with a computer-generated input, and there are many applications there. One, for example, Core Apps is doing augmented reality built right into their event app. And so there are lots of ways in terms of potential wayfinding, in terms of getting additional information, product information about a speaker. You take your phone out, and this speaker's photo can come to life and say, this is what it's going to be about. There are lots of different ways of doing that. And then ultimately, the real trend in the Consumer Electronics Show, for example, is to have augmented reality glasses that just look like normal glasses, and that you can bring on additional information and directional finding, and interact with Alexa or with voice recognition. There's just a lot of different ways that are happening, and so I think that the prices of those are coming down substantially. The capability is going. And I think that augmented reality is going to work its way into events in many different ways.
I definitely want to echo about the virtual reality thing. I'm seeing a lot on the consumer side that all the VR sources are saying 2020 is going to be the year for VR. And you might be thinking to yourself like, we've been saying that for years. Well, two big trends and kind of markers for it have been that if the release of the Oculus Quest, which is a self-contained VR setup that you can walk around the room, and it does kind of room scale VR as it's called. But also that if you look at this holiday season and Black Friday, every headset you could buy was sold out. And I think that shows that obviously even manufacturers weren't prepared for that sort of demand. And we have to see a couple of big video games that are getting released this year as well, and I think that's going to lead to a lot of people putting eyes on it, and I think it's going to be a big leap forward this year.
One of the ways that, as I track event technology trends, what I look for is I look for consumer adoption trends, because that's, if it's going to go into the consumer market and become widespread, and that hasn't happened yet with VR, but I think there's opportunities for the doing that with these new technologies, then it's going to work its way into events. And so I agree with you on that. Right?
I love it. I love it. Can I tack on a trend
Please.
as part of Corbin's? I think that one interesting thing too that we're looking at with this adoption of all these technologies, and we're talking about, our badges having near field communication and AR being everywhere. Connectivity, I think, is also very critical in 2020. We're at this junction right now where everyone now needs Wi-Fi at their events, right? It used to be maybe a couple of years ago, it was, I could say no, but now if you don't, people freak out, right? So I think, but we're also seeing this like almost two forces coming here. More needs for Wi-Fi, but also cost of Wi-Fi. And you go to the fees that hotels are charging, we're seeing cost of Wi-Fi just like skyrocket. I think you can ask any planner now and say like, so, Wi-Fi costs, and they just go, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about it. Let's not talk about it. And so I think that we're going to see, again, back to the rise of the alternate venue, but also the idea that we need to start negotiating Wi-Fi and understanding internet and, let's be honest, nerdy stuff, IT-related stuff, but enough so then that way we can make sure we have the things needed to do the technology that we have.
We will also, in addition to that, see expansion of 5G cellular networks as well. It's going to be interesting to see how that works into the convention center space, because 5G requires, it's a shorter range, much higher frequency. It doesn't go through walls as well, requiring many more antennas.
Well, the millimeter wavelength, don't get me all nerdy. I have to give a session this week on 5G, so I'm like super nerdy about it.
And so it's going to be interesting. It's the dilemma that the convention centers are going to face is the same dilemma when they stopped selling wired phones when mobile technology came in and completely dried up that market. As 5G comes into, and it's going to be, major cities are doing it now. Right. It's going to be available in arenas. It's great, line of sight stuff. But a convention center is probably one of the most difficult complexes to put in 5G, and yet you just wonder how the convention centers are going to be looking at it. Oh, we're going to install this all, and then it's going to dry up our Wi-Fi needs or parts of it. It's a dilemma that they have to face, and yet we'll be seeing that. But that eventually that will have. That will lessen the impact of Wi-Fi in a more secure manner as well.
So, what benefits does 5G bring in general? Yeah,
so there's a lot of exciting things about 5G. So the one that everyone is talking about the most is the shortwave millimeter band, which is like the 2 gigabits per second, which is just mind blowing that I can get faster internet over the air from my cell phone than I can from my home. But
way faster.
Way faster. But like you said, it doesn't penetrate walls, and that's, I think, the difficulty people are seeing. But what people don't realize too is that 5G is also in the medium wave and long wave spectrums as well. And the biggest benefit we're going to see is that a traditional 4G antenna on a cell tower has 4 antennas. So that means that, if, for example, we're trying to connect to the same cell tower, we're both kind of trading off between maybe 1 or 2 antennas, maybe, right? Then you start putting hundreds of people, they're all sharing those 4 antennas. 5G can have up to 256 antennas.
Really?
So that means that you can put dense amounts of people in one space, and we shouldn't see this effect where if you ever gone to a ball game or a concert where all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, my phone's working great, then everyone starts to show up and then your phone stops working. I think that's going to go away, and that's what, like you said, I think that's going to be the biggest benefit is that, now why do I need Wi-Fi? Because I can just connect to the cell tower.
And more securely as well. That's the other thing with that is, I think that there's going to continue to be a need for Wi-Fi for foreseeable future. It's just for international meetings and data roaming costs, and although those will slowly go away, I think, as well. It's we need Wi-Fi. We're going to need it for the next few years at the minimum.
What I've been telling people is the trend to not really worry. I mean, 5G is probably in the next maybe 5 years we'll start to have 5G on our phones, everybody's phones, and everyone will be using it. What I tell people to look out for their venues when they're sourcing venues is ask if they have Wi-Fi 6, which is the new standard of Wi-Fi, which allows better data transfer, more devices, things like that as well.
Not necessarily faster, but way more devices simultaneously, and that's another big trend that's happening.
Definitely.
Of course, if I may, one of the challenges that you have in contracting then when you're contracting years out is what kind of internet. Particularly, internet is frequently comped as part of a larger meeting package, or at a hotel or a convention center. Well, what exactly speed are you getting? And frequently, when you're paying for it, you'll say, I'm paying for it, but I want a guarantee of a certain speed, and you can frequently negotiate that into a contract. But the trick is, especially if your meeting's a few years away, and some people who are here at PCMA negotiate contracts 10 years out. Who knows what the technology is going to be? Who knows what the speed will be?
How can you how can you like build in guarantees and scale it?
You can't, except for the fact, well, unless you want antique internet, then you'll have to say what's good now. But the real reason why it's important, both to guarantee the accessibility, but also because you want to contain costs, and that's a real trick. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's something that I think you have to look at when you're negotiating a contract to try and figure out a means of making sure the venue will be giving you what's state of the art at the time of the meeting.
Absolutely.
And that it's not going to cost you an incredible markup to do it.
I love it.
Interesting. And then before we close out, and if you guys have any other trends you want to bring up, feel free, please, to do that. But Corbin wanted to talk about data integration.
I just think that it's, we are, as an industry are going through a major transformation now. Historically, from the beginning of event technology, in fact, the first event registration software product came out was in 1984. So we've been doing this, but historically, up until just a couple of years ago, everything was in data silos. Your registration system didn't talk with your mobile app, that didn't talk with your abstract management, your exhibitor management, and on and on and on. And now, with the advent of APIs, application programming interfaces, and the newer technology, cloud-based technology, which is built at its core to share data, is that you're seeing vastly greater capabilities for data integration, that you can use multiple products and covering, and it's back to tracking attendee data, but it's that you can get a very precise detail of what attendees' interests are and what they're doing and what they want, what they don't like, sentiment analysis. And that can help you better personalize your communication for future events, make it more meaningful for that attendee, and it can increase their likelihood of returning as well. So I think that data integration and what's happening here, and you're seeing Freeman's
who helped us out with a minor technical problem today. I was going to give them a shout out. So thanks for putting that in there. Go ahead.
But they have their fusion project is interesting. Getting nearly 100 event technology providers to agree on a platform to share data, and then with the looking to the future in the event tech tribe, there are a number of ones that are working together that you can have different companies that work together, and the product can act as one essentially. And so I think that this is opens up a whole new era in this decade for better service, more information to be able to better personalize future information requests.
I love it. That's awesome. I think Josh got another one too.
Well, yeah, I'm going to stay in the tech area.
Okay.
And something that actually I saw this morning that I was just making notes I didn't want to forget. I think it's a challenge for meeting organizers to deal with the expanding use of personal devices and cell phones at meetings. And I'm not just talking about people taking annoying calls and forgetting to turn their phones off, which remains an issue, but violation of rights that we've seen, well, in various respects. You might do a corporate meeting where you've got important proprietary information. How do you control if someone is using their phone to record the meeting, or they call someone up who's now listening who's not supposed to? The reason I think about today is I saw on one of the meeting websites that Condoleezza Rice is speaking here on Wednesday, which I knew, but apparently Condoleezza Rice's presentation is closed to the media, and they are prohibited from talking about it. Well, how are they collecting everybody's cell phone going into the presentation?
There's a contract they're supposed to sign.
Right.
But in a sense, and I don't know how they're going to do it, and I have to say now I'm leaving on Tuesday, so I'm not going to be guilty of anything that would happen, but anyone could potentially record what she's going to say. So I don't see sort of the meaning of it. Further, as a speaker, and I don't, maybe these gentlemen see it also, my presentation's copyrighted, but sometimes people record portions of my presentation or they take pictures of my PowerPoint, my copyrighted PowerPoint presentation. Now I choose to look at that they're taking pictures of me because they want to remember me. They're not doing it at the presentation, but although I know what's going on. But the point is that there's a lot of issues with technology that in meetings that still need to get a handle on, and with all of these new technologies, let alone what we've already got, groups need to think about it, maybe through codes of conduct, but then how do you enforce it? So I would just throw that out as a sort of a trend that I think about, and some of the groups that I work with think about it also.
I think you bring up a good point too. I mean, like we've seen it kind of as a trend over the last couple of years that, for example, at concerts and comedy shows, you have to turn your cell phone in and put it in a black bag so that way you can't use it and it's locked and you can't get it till it's afterwards. But I mean, a bigger trend is that we have to stop thinking about events just as, if someone captures it, it ruins the experience. Oh, if we live stream it, someone's not going to want to attend the event. You need to make your event so good that who cares if they record it? Who cares if they live stream it? If they watch the live stream and they watch a video, they're going to want to come. And I think that it ties in perfectly with what you're talking about for sure. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting for sure.
It's the TED Talk example where you give everything away and it makes the event even more valuable.
Definitely. I have a small, it's going to be a super obscure kind of trend, but I'm going to challenge the audience, all the planners out there, everyone in the events industry, to stop using the word busy to describe your days. So we did an episode on Event Brew, one of our podcasts, about why everyone needs to stop using the word busy, and it's our most controversial, also mixed in with most popular episode. It's kind of weird, but I think far too often we're all have so much going on. We talk about all the contract language, where all the technology, all the safety concerns, and everything like that. And I think the default that we come to when someone says, "Hey, how are you?" is, "I'm busy." And I think that we need to start thinking about how we're not busy and how we are super productive, and also how to get beyond just having superficial level conversations in the events industry about being busy and being the most stressful job in the world, to being, how do we create these amazing experiences that tie in all this stuff that we're talking about. So that's my random trend.
Well, excellent. Thanks, you guys. And you mentioned Event Brew. Where can people find out more about what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So Endless is a nationwide AV company, so we take the suckiness out of doing AV. But if you don't need an AV company, but you just want to see all the awesome content that we produce, we luckily have 3 podcasts, Event Icons, which feature amazing gentlemen like these guys, where you can dive deep into their topics. Event Tech Podcast, where Brent Kruger and I talk about super nerdy event tech stuff, put our glasses and be all nerdy. And then Event Brew, which is kind of opinion-based, and we talk about controversial stuff like using the word busy. But you can all catch all this all at helloendless.com, or just feel free to search Endless Events on Google.
Excellent. Joshua?
Well, I'm not as out there tech as he is, and usually people aren't asking how to find a lawyer.
Until they really need it.
Yeah, then they'll find it.
Fortunately, I have I can't say busy, an active law practice where I'm reachable at my email address, the easiest way, which is grimesj@grimeslaw.org. which I will not spell out for now. I also speak at industry events.
Such as this one today
at PCMA, and I'll actually be back here in San Francisco across the street for the MPI Northern California Chapter's annual conference in March. Amongst other groups.
I'll see you there.
Good. Amongst other groups, and so I'm out here, and I've talked to meetings today also on other issues, and look forward to interacting with
Thank
people.
you for all your contribution.
Sure, no problem.
And as well with Corbin.
I think the best way to contact me is through my website, corbinball.com, and there are hundreds of articles and lots of other content.
really comprehensive. Definitely check out Corbin's website. So thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for joining us for this meeting today on location broadcast from PCMA Convening Leaders. Stay tuned for a brief message from Tourism Montreal. Thank you for joining us.